every decision maker will be having to make a decision without feeling they have enough information. Most decisions aren't just one big decision. They're a series of multiple smaller decisions that you don't know if they're going to be the right one or the wrong one until you actually take it.
So hello, everyone. We're starting here another episode of the VTEX podcast. First of all, I wanted to thank AWS, our sponsor, for today's episode. So I'm really excited to welcome Rupal Patel. Rupal is a former CIA intelligence officer. She's also the author of CIA to CEO, the founder of the Global Leadership Lab, and she works with leaders in organizations around the world on decision-making, influence, and strategic clarity. So welcome. It's great to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing, like your background is very fascinating and super interesting. And I'm particularly interested to start off talking about decision-making under uncertainty, right? Where I'm assuming that you've had, like a lot of experience with that in CIA and in business environment. So my question is like, how does decision making look like in face of uncertainty in practice?
Yes. So there's the nuance to this that no one wants to hear is that almost every decision maker will be having to make a decision without feeling they have enough information.
Yeah.
And so acknowledging that this is just the reality of what it means to make decisions when there is so much complex data that can affect that decision is a really difficult thing to do. Mm-hmm. And so the best way I have seen the leaders, both at the CIA and outside of the CIA, make decisions under uncertainty is to just do what they can with the information they have at any given moment. Because one of the things I shared in my keynote was there is no such thing as a perfect or a complete data set. Okay. And there's this idea that, well, if I just get more information, it will help me make the best decision. And the reality is that most decisions aren't just one big decision. They're a series of multiple smaller decisions that you don't know if they're going to be the right one or the wrong one until you actually take it. So the way I've seen leaders navigate this is to say, okay, well, I have enough to do something. I will start small, test what is happening in response to that action, and then I will have more data with which to then say, okay, well, now that we're at this point and we have this information, this is the direction or this is the direction, but it's a constant process. It's not a one-off thing, but a series of multiple sequential decisions over time.
Interesting. But how do you think about sort of there's higher stake decisions, lower stakes decisions in your framework?
Yeah.
Basically what you're saying, maybe in a high stakes decision, maybe try to break it somehow. Is exactly. That how I should apply the framework?
I think it's both for high stakes and low stakes, to be honest. And sometimes, again, the irony is that the lower the stakes, the more people think that they need to just wait until they have the perfect amount of information. The good thing is that in the vast majority of business decisions, it is not a life or death decision. And that was very different in some of the decision-making contexts that I was operating in at the CIA, where actually, when a general is deciding, okay, we'll send this unit here versus there, it could potentially have life or death impacts. And so that weight is something that we shouldn't bring into corporate decision-making because it is not, most decisions can either be tweaked or minimized or changed in some way where the impact isn't ever going to be catastrophic. And so the hard part is to acknowledge that we are going to have to do something, and the longer we wait, the harder it will be to act because the situation will change, and then we'll need more information because now the context is different or something has happened in the market. So again, it's this idea that low stakes or high stakes take a educated, informed, experienced position and decision, and then iterate from there.
Interesting. No, very, very, very interesting. I want the other interesting topic about, I guess, the CIA and is about influencing people, right? And so how do you think about influencing people, and especially when you don't have authority? Like, what sort of frameworks, or how do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So this one is, again, it takes effort, which is why, there's such in the world we live in now, there's such a emphasis on like hacks and quick wins and, shortcuts. And the reality is, in order to build influence that is sustainable over time, there has to be a consistent focus on the other person or on the audience that you are trying to influence. So, for example, at the CIA, when you're trying to build influence with a potential asset that you want to recruit, or with, a group of people, you learn more about them than you tell them about you, right? It's not about you anymore. It's not about your idea or your product or your decision. It's about, well, what's happening in their lives? How can I understand what's important to them so I can frame what I am doing in a way that's going to resonate more deeply with them? This was also true for us as analysts. It was, when you're briefing the president, his level of complexity and what he has the attention span for and the way he learns and absorbs information is very different to individual by individual, but then also to what you would present to a special forces unit who are 6 people in the middle of nowhere. And so understanding each individual audience, what's important to them, what context are they operating in, what are the choices and the struggles that they are facing, how do they make decisions, how do they receive information, all of this stuff. We refer to it as sort of building a case file, right, of targeting your audience or your target, and understanding really what makes them tick is the best way, but it is also a very involved way of building influence. So you have to be willing to commit to those, particularly, in a corporate context. What are the most high value conversations? What are the most important relationships that you need to really focus this influence on, and then do all of that work for those?
Very nice. And what, in your experience in like business setting, like what is like the most common mistake that you see business leaders making in terms of influence?
It's being so focused on their message that they don't pay attention to their audience.
I see.
So they will decide, I have this to say, or this is what I'm going to put forward at the town hall meeting. And too often I've seen, well, there's an elephant in the room, right? The employees at that town hall meeting are worried about, I don't know, maybe staff reductions, or they're worried about the war in Ukraine, but the leader doesn't ever address those. They go in with this single-minded idea of like, what I have to say is what I'm going to put out there, but there's no acknowledgement of what everybody else is actually thinking about. And so I often say to leaders, look, if there's an elephant in the room, address the elephant, because whether you say something about it or not, it's a distraction from what people are going to hear from what you say. So I think leaders need to be really sensitive to what is happening in the workforce, like understanding what are the things that the team is concerned about, what are some of the opportunities they're really excited about, and then how can you craft your message about your strategy, your agenda, whatever it is, in a way that's going to reflect that you understand where they are, and you care enough to bring them along on that journey. Yeah.
A lot of empathy building.
Exactly.
And then tailoring the message. Yeah. Exactly. No, this is great stuff. I'm going to move on to the my other question is around about reading people, which I guess is also quite expertise on in the CIA. So in terms of like you've been trained on reading people, like what are some tips or signals that that you pick up on that maybe leaders miss about reading people?
So this is, I think, one of those myths that is so pervasive, and it's the idea that you can read people. Because the reality actually is that as human beings, any one of us has a 50-50 chance of getting it right. Because we think that other people are very obvious in their emotions, that if you're happy, you'll smile, or if you're angry, you'll frown, or, we have these very strong associations. And for some people, that's true. But there are a lot of other people for whom you can't read. I mean, you and I will probably be able to, name a few people that we know or have worked with. You just never know what's going on in their minds, right? They have a poker face and they're not very expressive, or they're not very obvious. And so the honest reality is that we often get it really wrong.
Yeah.
And, I, even knowing that it's not an exact science and how to read people, have often been in rooms where I was like, oh man, I lost them halfway through that conversation. And then at the end of the meeting, they'll be like, wow, that was really great. And I took all of these notes. And so one is to acknowledge that you can't ever really know. But secondly, and this is somewhat of a very particular nuance of what I've just shared, is that each individual might be harder to read, where you have a 50-50 chance of getting it right versus getting it wrong. But in an aggregate setting, the average will be relatively readable. So if you have a group of people and you sense that there's some tension, or you sense that there's some high energy, or you sense there's some anxiety, that you should lean into in a group setting, because of course, it will roughly average out. But if you're trying to do that on a one-on-one context, it's harder to do in a one-off meeting. But you would understand on an individual basis that person more perfectly over time, right? Because in this first conversation you and I are having, I don't know if you're smiling and nodding means that you are agreeing, or you're just being polite, right? But if we have 20 conversations, or if you and I work together over years, over that body of experience, then you build a much bigger data set on which to be able to say, yeah, you know what, when Alex does this, this is usually what it means.
Interesting. So, like, this is very insightful. You're saying that, like, in a group, it's easier to read a group setting than an individual setting, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And then in terms of influence, going back to the previous question, I guess, could I say that it's easier to perhaps because in order to influence, you need to somehow read and have empathy. So would you say it's easier to influence a group of people than an individual?
Again,
how does that work out?
There's a nuance here, because both require some preparation. So both require some upfront preparation, or advanced preparation, and also in the moment, reading the room and reading the energy. But also on an individual basis, the advanced preparation can help you navigate around not knowing how to read them in real life. So what I mean by that is, if I'm having a conversation with you and I'm meeting you for the first time, I don't know anything about you. But in my advanced preparation, what I can do is talk to your colleagues, or talk to people who have worked with you for years, or look up your profiles online and see, what kinds of things does Alex post about? What's he about? Like, trying to get as much information about you as an individual as I possibly can, and then use that to inform at least the initial way that you and I can engage in how I try to influence you, right? It's, again, basing it on data, not on just how are you responding to me in this moment, but what have I done ahead of time to learn about who you are?
No, that's good. Very, very good tips. I'm interested about your transition from CIA to the business world. Like, what were the biggest surprises? And how was that transition? Like, how did that look like?
Yeah. The transition was relatively smooth in some ways, because I left the CIA and went to business school, because I thought, to make a transition into the private sector, I really need to understand the language and the mechanics and, the details of what it means to run and operate a business. And so that gave me some I won't say experience, but it gave me some insight into the world of business. But then, of course, all knowledge really is on the job training. And I learned so much more about the skill set that would serve me from the CIA in this new world, only by actually getting my hands dirty and being there. And so the bumps along the way was sort of figuring out, like, what is relevant from the CIA and what can I bring here, and what's not really, what's not as operationally valuable as it.
I see.
And just being willing to learn basically everything from scratch, right? And trying to put any assumptions and any baggage behind, and just being willing to just take it for what it was. Because there were in some ways, there were very few parallels, because again, the scope of the work, the kind of work, the intensity, the what's at stake is very different in the world of the CIA from the world of work. And yet so many of the fundamentals are are the same because it's still just people operating in big organizations, right? And so those fundamentals, what surprised me was actually bureaucracy and politics and all of that stuff that you think is unique or that I thought was unique to the CIA is pretty universal, right? It doesn't matter whether you're working in tech or in retail or in whatever.
Interesting.
Human beings are pretty consistent across the board. And so that dynamic around, again, leadership and how you motivate people, how you understand people, how you navigate the politics, how the personalities and all of that stuff was almost exactly the same, just in a different context.
Interesting. And what did you have in it to unlearn, or was it wasn't relevant for the business world that was relevant in the CIA?
Yeah, I think intensity.
Okay.
Because, again, as I was saying, the nature of the work that I was doing was very intense. The CIA is a pretty intense organization, and I can often be an intense person. And so sort of dialing that all down, right? Not everything has to be this highly efficient, highly analyzed thing. There are some things that can just be a bit more fluid and a bit more sort of organic.
Yes.
Right? And so that tension between how much to structure, how much to let just unfold what's going to unfold, the tension between, gosh, not every decision is a high stakes decision, and some things you can just be a little bit more casual about. Obviously nothing big, but again, this idea that not everything has to come with that same level of intensity and scrutiny was something that I definitely did have to unlearn.
That's very interesting. I guess it also depends on maybe a startup, that level of intensity could be more valuable than
parallel.
depending on the because it's sort of almost life or death depending on the startup's situation.
Yeah.
But I could understand what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Going on intensity, since you've probably been in these very high intense pressure situations, how do you deal with high intensity and how do you deal with high pressure situations? How do you stay level headed during high intense situations?
This is something that I only realized after leaving the CIA, is that many leaders, and I will throw myself in this pool as well, are often contrarian, right? They become leaders or they become founders because they see something that other people don't see, or they do things a little bit differently to others that helps them achieve what they achieve. And I find that instinct to not always do the opposite, but do something a little bit different really helps in high pressure situations, because how that works for me now is when everyone around me is running around like their hair's on fire and there's a lot of chaos, that is when I get really focused. It is almost like a switch has been flipped, and I respond in the opposite way to those around me. And what I realized is that it's this agility of leadership to know how to show up in different contexts. And so for me, like I said, what that looks like is when everyone is really anxious or nervous or worried or stressed, or it's really chaotic, that's when I can come in and be really calm and really just focused and level-headed and not get sucked into that. On the flip side, when there's a lot of, when people are really down or feeling sluggish and they need a bit of motivation, that's when I can dial things up because I'm just paying attention. It all goes back to that idea of paying attention, right? Being sensitive to your surroundings and to the people. And as a leader, that is our job, is to decide, this is what this context needs. Sometimes you need to be the cheerleader. Sometimes you need to be the one in the background pushing everyone from behind. Sometimes you need to be the one who's motivating people from the front. It's never one thing. And so that willingness to play different roles, to sometimes be the star, sometimes be the one in the background, to sometimes, all of those things is what I've seen the best leaders do.
Well, a lot of adaptability and depending on what the environment and the environment needs.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about is this a mindset thing that you, or do you think it's something that can be learned? Could you bring some more frameworks around how to deal with these high pressure situations and adaptability?
Yeah, I think everything can be learned. I believe fundamentally that there are no naturally gifted anyone at anything. There are some people for whom certain things come more easily or less, but everybody who's excellent at anything is practicing. And so I talk about leadership as a practice because I fundamentally believe it is a constant practice. And so what leaders can do to develop a bit more of an agility and a bit more of a adaptability is first and foremost to pay attention, right? Again, so often what we do in our day-to-day lives is not routine in that we're doing the same thing, but we have certain patterns that we follow. We have certain people that we're always talking to or who are giving us who are our eyes and ears on the ground, or the team members who we trust to tell us how, things are actually happening. But actually that can really narrow our focus in a way that isn't fully representative of the bigger picture. And so I always force myself to, and I think, again, any leader can do this, is to go back and forth, go back to, yes, doing the high level strategic things and only focusing on the big picture, and then very regularly and consistently find ways to go down to the operational level, right? Whether that's in the office or whether that's at the factory or whether that's in the customer service center, and just see and experience and hear and pay attention to what's happening. What are people saying? Not like this is official visit where you come down and shake hands and take pictures, but to immerse yourself in that environment to get actual, what we would call ground truth, right? About what is happening. And then that gives you a much better, deeper awareness of what is happening at all levels of your organization. So then you can say, well, you know what? I thought from up here, this is what was happening. And that's why I was showing up as the cheerleader or whatever it is. But actually, now that I've paid attention and collected some more data, I see that we need somebody to just be a little bit more inspirational right now, right? People are feeling low on energy, or they're feeling depressed by whatever else it is. Again, just paying attention to what is happening in your organization and then saying, okay, well, this is how I'm going to choose to affect it. This is what I can do to impact it. This is the role that I can play to start shifting things in a different direction. And that takes a lot of time and effort.
Yes, it does. It does. Here, I know.
Yeah. I often joke that I'm not here to depress people, but so much of, again, what it takes to be really good at anything takes time and effort and practice. And those are things that everyone, but particularly leaders, are often very short of, is time.
Yes.
And an ability to do things consistently because they're being pulled in so many different directions.
Want to execute, but then sometimes that gets into the way of actually truly reading the environment and adapt, because you just focused on the goal blindly without reading all the levels of everything that you're talking about. No, very, very good. I have one last question that I was seeing your talk that you're very practical at the end of every specific block, giving specific tips. I wanted to, before we close, what if there's one takeaway of one specific tool that we can bring to business leaders to make better decisions, what would that be, that one tool that I can apply tomorrow, for example?
Yes. So again, this is so simple that it's so easy not to do, but I firmly believe that too many leaders do not have enough time to think.
Okay.
And so building in protected, unviable time in your calendar where you can step away from the execution, step away from the meetings, step away from the constant doing, and sit back and reflect on, well, what is the bigger picture here? Where are things going well? Where are things going a bit off course? How can I show up differently? What's needed of me at this moment? How is all of those big picture questions that are so critical, but most people don't have time to focus on, is one of the most important things a leader can do, is to protect your time to think, because it will also give you more confidence in the decisions that you are making, because it takes you out of the noise. It gives you that peace and that ability to reflect and to draw on the experience that you have had over the decades of your career, on some of the expertise, all of the expertise that you've developed, and to just be able to sit with yourself, to take your own counsel instead of constantly being bombarded by others, is probably one of the best ways to be better at decision making, because you remember how much you can do instead of being distracted by everything else that's going on around you.
No, fascinating. Thank you so much for the talk and for the time. Yeah, this was a fascinating conversation. I'm definitely going to take some time to reflect and think to become a better leader, influencer. Yeah, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.